Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Underground. So it looks like we're done. The last U.S. forces have pulled out of Afghanistan, and officially the Afghan war is over. Now, of course, that does not mean that the work is done. There are still a lot of people on the ground that need to get out, and we will continue to do the best, very, very minimal work that we can do to help get those people out. So let's go over a few updates on the situation in Afghanistan as we wrap up this situation. Like I mentioned, the U.S. CENTCOM commander has confirmed that hundreds of Americans have been left behind. Now, the hundreds, the low hundreds number that they are giving us is almost certainly higher than that, because if they're admitting to hundreds of people left behind, hundreds of American citizens left behind, then the number is almost certainly higher than that. Also, efforts are underway to renovate Hamid Karzai International Airport, with both Turkey and Qatar partnering with the Taliban to reopen the airport for international flights. As far as timing on this, they're still in negotiations for what exactly that's going to look like, but this is very much a very destroyed third world country airport now. It really always has been, but the resources that are going to be needed for civilian flights are quite significant. So it's going to be interesting to see how and what kind of civilian airline efforts are undertaken and how long that's going to take. Most people are thinking weeks at the very earliest. Some people are saying months. We can't really speak intelligently on how long it's going to take because there's just so much destruction, and it's Afghanistan. So it's really hard to gauge as to when civilian flights are going to open back up, if they are going to open back up. Also, the Taliban is continuing their door-to-door executions of really anyone they can get their hands on that opposes them or is a threat to their regime. This includes lots of women being kidnapped as wives for the Taliban soldiers, in addition to being sold into slavery. Now, as far as sources for this information, they're few and far between, because the Taliban is very much a censorship-driven organization. So, when you go on social media and you just try to search for information in at least in English, you're not going to find very much. Also, in the native languages, you're also not going to find very much either, because simply people are having their cell phones taken away and the internet is being cut in places like that. So that's why you're not going to see very much, but it's a very strong, it's kind of like a no kidding assessment that they're going door to door. And we have seen videos of this over the past few weeks, so it makes sense that they would continue that in shockingly significant numbers. Also, the conflict in Panjshir is continuing. The Northern Alliance is continuing to make, I hesitate to use the word headway, because they're not really gaining any terrain. They're just preventing the Taliban from advancing as fast as they possibly could. However, we are seeing Taliban using Black Hawk helicopters to conduct aviation operations in the Panjshir Valley. So, it's probably going to be these helicopters are probably not going to operate for very long, just because maintenance is going to be very, very impossible. It takes a lot of resources to keep a helicopter going in peacetime. Like, just ask really any civilian helicopter pilot, and you'll know, or any really aviation pilot, and they can tell you that helicopters and really any aviation asset requires a lot of resources just to keep functioning. So even though we are seeing video after video after video of Taliban flying Blackhawks and things like that, unless they get the parts, which could happen, they're going to be running out of resources, out of parts, out of maintenance capabilities and things like that. And then also there's a technology gap. There's only so many people in Afghanistan that know how to fly, and a pastime of the ANA, who are the people flying these Black Hawk helicopters. We trained the people who are flying these Black Hawks for the Taliban. Those people have a very long history of flying into mountains. So ANA fatalities from helicopter crashes was extremely high all throughout the Afghan war, and it only improved by a marginal means. Anybody who's ever had the misfortune of flying with an Afghan pilot knows exactly what I'm talking about. So there's definitely an expertise gap there. And also, we are receiving reports that the U.S. government, particularly the U.S. State Department, is doing everything they can to stop private rescue efforts. This includes things such as petitioning other bordering nations to make it difficult for private planes and aircraft to stage and refuel and resources and things like that. So this makes sense. We have seen, as shocking and as horrible and as biased as it may seem to say, the cold hard truth of the matter is that the United States, through every indication that we have been getting throughout this entire crisis, the United States, on the strategic level, is doing everything they can to make sure that as few people get out of Afghanistan as possible from the civilian side of things. The military military commanders on the ground have been documented time and time again, preventing women and children from getting on flights. We partnered directly with the Taliban, and gave them a list of people to not let through checkpoints. Right, so it's like it's anyone who has been following this from just a casual nature knows that there's something abhorrently wrong. And we here, based on what we've seen, just overall, the overall mood definitely seems to be that this is less about incompetence and more about an intentional act. So even though, again, it seems biased to say this, it really is a kind of simple assessment to make the argument that, hey, look, they're not really super concerned with getting survivors out, because every American that gets out of Afghanistan and back to the United States will have a story to tell. And that story is not going to look positive for the Biden regime. So while they may not actively be taking measures to kill Americans directly, they are definitely doing everything they can to prevent people from leaving Afghanistan. Like, I know that might upset a lot of people to hear, but it definitely seems from our side of the fence, from what we have seen, that at this point, that definitely seems like that's taking place. Now, of course, military operations are military operations, and there's a lot of clandestine stuff going on behind the scenes, I'm sure. But by and large, from the diplomatic side of things, this, like, we have to stop like looking at this, or at least we here have stopped looking at this as incompetence and more of an intentional act. That's all I'm saying on that. And this kind of goes into social media. So we have seen over the past 24 hours significant censorship of the survivors of these horrendous attacks. Like, one of the more famous ones that has come out has been the mother of one of the fallen Marines was censored very strongly from Facebook and Instagram based on her posting stuff that is critical of the president. So, you know, you have to remember, the White House publicly admitted through their press secretary just a few weeks ago that they are directing and flagging posts for Facebook to remove. Did we just forget that somehow? So, of course, the regime is directing, or at least heavily involved in, or the social media and the government, which by now should be viewed as being the same entity, are taking measures to make sure that their story does not get told. So, as bad as this sounds, it really does seem to be the truth. Or at least, again, from what we see, this is definitely happening. And, that goes into more stuff when it comes to the military. So stories are coming out right now of the soldiers on the ground. They actually had the last few soldiers that were on the ground actually had their flights delayed so that they could clean up feces and blood and trash and things, and just horrendous debris for the Taliban. They had to beautify Kaya before they left and pick up the trash. While these attacks are going on, while they're getting shot at with rockets and shot at with small arms, they're being forced to clean things up by their leadership. I cannot think of anything more abhorrent than that. You just had your buddies killed a couple of days ago, and now you're picking up trash for the Taliban. Like, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Now, there is a counter argument to that, and I will explain the counter argument as to why this was done. And I will, hopefully in explaining this counter argument, I will prove that a point, I guess. The counter argument is that the reason that this cleaning up was directed was to not to give the Taliban any propaganda value for U.S. troops leaving behind litter like MRE wrappers and things like that. So not giving the Taliban any way to say, the Americans are horrible people, look what they left behind for us, and stuff like that. Now that's the counter argument, and hopefully just by me explaining that short counter argument, you realize how dumb it is. The Taliban is our adversary, okay? They're an adversary. We're leaving. We're not coming back, right? At least for any significant time. Well, with the current regime that we have, we're not coming back, even if there are Americans on the ground. I would be very hard-pressed to find if we're ever going back to that country with the current situation that we're in. So some sergeant major or some general coming up with this idea of, police call, that shows that our military leadership is completely out of touch with this little thing we call warfare. Like, I cannot think of any competent military leader of any rank or pay grade that would look at the situation and say, you know what, we need to make sure they don't have propaganda value. Maybe the biggest propaganda value was the American citizens we left behind. That's probably the biggest propaganda value. We don't need to clean up our MRE wrappers in the complete and utter wasteland that is Afghanistan. It is the third world country. The place was filthy when we got there. And on top of all of that, you're forcing your soldiers to be even more demoralized than they already are. So this, again, looks to be like a criminally negligent lapse in leadership and judgment, which has become the term that I guess could describe the entirety of senior military leadership at this point. As to why anyone enlists in the military right now, I have no clue. After this, the military recruiting is going to have a severely hard time getting anyone to enlist. And I can't say that's a bad thing at this stage in the game because, man, I tell you, it has just been one thing after another. And really, that's that's really just the mood for Afghanistan for right now. Like I mentioned, private recovery efforts are underway, but they're fighting tooth and nail. There's really no organization level. It's not like any private contractors have Reaper drones out there. They're operating with no air support in a hostile nation where their government doesn't want to even bring them home. So a private contracting group gets stuck in Afghanistan. Guess what? They're stuck there, right? So our government has already made it perfectly clear that we're willing to leave American citizens on the ground in Afghanistan. So that means that any recovery efforts are going to have to realize the same exact thing. So I know that this update is kind of not really helpful for those dudes on the ground or trying to get on the ground, but that's because we don't really have any intelligence picture at all. We're doing what we can, but it's few and far between. Social media is not helpful anymore. We don't have as much. Anyone who has been in the area that has been providing us information, without even knowing it through their social media, they've already gone. We've got tens of thousands of Afghans literally walking on foot to the Iran border. We've got countless other people going on foot to the border. We've got other people just trying to hunker down and hide. So there's really not a whole lot when it comes to the intel picture that we can provide right now. And this is the part where it's horrible to be an analyst because you're just in the dark. People expect you to have the answers, and there are none. Like, we can't find anything that would be very helpful because we're just so in the dark. And just because you are in the dark, it also means that people still are going to be counting on you. It doesn't, the fact that you're in the dark doesn't matter. So that's why this is kind of a frustrating thing. And that's why it's become less about the tactical level intelligence of on the ground and more about strategic issues. And that's why we've kind of taken a step back from what we have been doing. And even though we are still looking at KMZs and we're still putting out KMZs and we're still building things, man, I myself and the rest of the team here spent 16 hours yesterday looking for anything that we could drop on a map. Couldn't find a single thing. Not a single point was created yesterday because we can't find anything. And that's infuriating. And just being helpless as an analyst is really hard to do. It's really difficult, especially when we know that there are military assets out there that can share this information and can help things, but they can't because their government is forcing them not to. So that's why we haven't really focused so much on doing these intel briefs. We're not even going to go to the map today because, like I said, I don't have anything to show you on the map. We do know that cash is running out in the country. There's people are stacked up outside every single bank in Kabul, and there's nothing. There's no cash left. So there's a problem there. People are trying to get money for bribes to get through the Taliban checkpoint, for bribes for the Iranian border crossing guards, for bribes for the Pakistani guys, and there's just no cash. Even then, how much money? How much do you think the value of the Afghan currency is? It's probably not very much right now. And again, I'm sorry for going off on kind of a rant about this one today, but that's really all there is left to do, at least when it comes to these kinds of videos. A lot of people, again, have a lot of opinions about this, and we want to do a very long series on not just the Afghan war, but the extraction process, this disastrous situation, and we want to at least learn from it, okay? Because we cannot change the past, but we can definitely learn from it. So we're compiling thoughts, but right now a lot of us just don't know what to say. So we don't really have any intel to share. We don't know what to say because it's just, there's just so much to say. We don't even know where to begin. But I do want to address one idea. And that idea is the question that we have gotten over and over and over again over the past, well, ever since we've existed as a coherent group with a name, I guess. And that question is, what can we do to fix this? This has been something that we have been asked, and other people have been asking, and we ourselves have been asking ever since, well, really the problems in our society became severe enough for us to get together as a group of friends and want to do what we can to change it. Now, obviously, as time has gone on, our gut feeling of this situation is going to get much worse has proven to be correct, unfortunately. And as a result, more and more people have been asking, okay, I've hit my limit. Enough is enough. What can I do to fix this problem? Okay, the long list of problems that our government, our society, our culture, our economy, all of this stuff. What can I do to help fix it? Okay, and if I were forced, like I'm some kind of authority on this, I'm not. If I were forced, and if we here collectively, our answer has been to have many children, raise them the right way, and ask me that question again in 15 years. That's the answer. You want to fix our economy? Okay, there's your answer. Have many kids, raise them right, and ask me again in 15 years. Okay, you want to fix our political regime? Okay, same answer. You want to fix service members dying from a totally preventable set of events? There's your answer. Now, let's walk that back, because nobody wants to hear that answer, and it's an unsatisfying answer, I will admit. It doesn't seem, the answer is like, you've got to be kidding me, right? Like, that's the response. You ask, well, what can I do to fix this? And we say, okay, well, have kids and raise them right, and then we'll approach this when they're old enough. And then the answer to the response is usually like, okay, well, what? Like, that's all you got? After all the stuff you put out, that's really all you got? And the answer is yes. Really, all of the stuff that we've put out previously, if people want our opinion, and we know that people watch these videos, we know that we have a pretty significant audience. Like, it's not just one guy out there watching our videos thousands of times. We know that people watch our stuff, and we know that we just get an inbox full of stuff every day. So people are looking for answers. And even though we don't claim to have any kind of really good answer, this is the one we've got. And let me explain it. Let me explain why. Because this should not be the last option, but it is. And let me explain why. So let's start with holding the military accountable, because that's where everybody's at right now. Like, why did the military leave people behind? Why did the military fail this mission? Why did the military force those soldiers to clean up a base in front of the Taliban and humiliating them as we're getting ready to leave the country? Why is the military gone woke? You know, how can we hold these guys accountable? Okay, well, the direct answer to that is really the bigger issue: holding our politicians accountable. Now, this is a question we get asked all the time. This is the big one, right? How do we hold our politicians accountable? Okay, well, that's not really possible right now for a variety of reasons. Um, and really, the only way to hold our politicians accountable is a couple of things. Either vote them out, okay, remove them from office via, democratic or constitutional republic means, right? Or civil disobedience, be enough of a bee in their bonnet to where they change their behavior. Now, the first option isn't really an option anymore, right? Like, we know our voting system is corrupted to the point to where I don't know if anybody really trusts it anymore. Um, and since nobody really trusts it, does it have any authority? That's the real question that we're asking, right? Civil disobedience is kind of the same. It's kind of the same thread. Like, it either works or it doesn't. It's either a waste of time to do a protest, or it's disproportionately the stuff you'd have to do is disproportionate. You'd have to burn down a city like BLM and Antifa for anybody to listen to you, and even then they just pander to you. Like, you still just burn down your own city, and you're the one who has to clean it up because they're just going to do the minimum to get you off their back. So right now, neither of these options works. But let's just examine the vote them out option. Okay, so our election laws are either a moot point or our rule of law is crumbling, right? Okay, well, how do you change that? Well, you change Congress. Okay, well, you see how we're getting back to the same thing. Like, well, should we use force to change Congress? Well, no, obviously that's not going to work. Look at January 6th. That was a peaceful demonstration, Look at how that turned out. Any kind of force will be immediately shut down, and then now you've got all your most dedicated people either in jail or dead. So now we're back to voting. Vote the Congress people out. The laws are bad. Congress people write the laws, so vote them out. Okay, well, we're back to the same problem. Okay, so voting doesn't really work. That's not something that is practical in a large sense, right? So from that we're back to two options. We could go back to civil disobedience, or we can go to the courts to change how laws are written and how things can work in that sphere, right? We can say if a district is being gerrymandered, we can sue and maybe do something about it. Okay, well, again, the court system is not really in anyone's favor who values this thing called liberty anymore. But let's just examine the civil disobedience thing for just a second. Again, is it effective right now? I would hesitate to say probably no. And the only way to make civil disobedience more effective is to change the education system. Okay, well, to change the education system, you need a lot of other things, but it's something that is not an easy task to do, right? Likewise with the courts. Okay, you want to change the courts. You want to get all of these liberal judges, or if nothing else, get the political judges out and replace them with judges who are as impartial as can be and not quite literally activists in a robe. You're going to have to change the institutions that even allow someone like that to be in the position to get a judge seat, right? So now we're back to really the same kind of option, right? How would you do that? Well, voting. Well, that's not really an option either, So do you see how we're starting to break this thing apart? Now, fortunately, institutions in education, to change your education system and to change the institutions that enable certain groups but disable other groups, well, then you're coming back to the concept of strength in numbers. Okay, so now we start realizing how screwed we really are as an American people. Like, so let's just recap right quick. We can't hold our politicians accountable because our voting system is crap, right? And we can't fix our voting system because our Congress people are crap. And our Congress people are crap because the voting system is crap. And then we keep going on, okay? So, well, protesting doesn't work because they're unaffected by it. They just put up fences around themselves and laugh and cackle, in their own little private basements, right? But If we keep going back and we keep going back, we can realize that, hey, we can change that by having strength in numbers. And the answer to have strength in numbers is to have lots of kids and raise them to have a certain set of values. That's it, right? That's your answer. That's how we get this answer, right? There's really not a whole lot we can do right now to change our institutions, to change our voting, to change our education system, to change, even if you wanted to erase the US government and replace it with something else. It's not really a feasible effort to do so. You got to walk it all the way back to creating the smallest unit of, freedom, which is the individual. You have to create an individual. You have to have kids, and you have to have a lot of them, so that when time comes, you have a society that is willing to change things. And here's the thing, though, it doesn't just stop with having kids, right? Because having kids and having a lot of them and raising them to have a certain set of values, that's not just the end game, right? We might not even get that far. We have to actually stay alive long enough to do this, right? The times we live in are very rough, right? They're not exactly the hardest humans have ever put up with, but they're not easy times to live in. And in order to stay alive long enough to do this, to avoid imprisonment, to avoid forced medical procedures, right, to have the best chance at making those tiny humans and growing them up, right, we have to stay alive long enough to do this. And in doing so, to stay alive, we have to accept that our rights have consequences and that significant lifestyle changes are needed. And that means, when you realize that even though we do have rights, okay, we don't really at the end of the day, because all of these little other ways of changing things are not as effective as they could be. And since we're realizing that we're at this final step of, okay, significant lifestyle changes are needed in order to stay alive, to have kids, to have strength in numbers, to change the education system, to change the institutions, to make civil disobedience work again, to make our courts work again, to make voting work again, to make Congress work again, to hold our politicians accountable, to hold the military accountable. That's how we drive our way back down through this, and this takes a lot of time. And this also means that all of those things I just mentioned are not exactly feasible options at this particular time. The top three here, this is what we've got. This is what we should invest in heavily. Now, we can do the other stuff too. Go to your local school board. Demand to know what your kid is learning in school. And if they're learning some stuff, take them out of school. Simple as that. It may not be easy as that, but it is as simple as that, right? Just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy, right? So there you go. Oh, you don't like an institution? Don't engage in it and actively take measures to defy said institution, right? You can do these things, but by and large, it's only because the top three things here are your priority. At least they're our priority. And this is exactly what we're doing right now, as we have spent hundreds of hours writing and filming and recording content for you guys. From the original OG podcast to these new YouTube videos on education and things like that. Those top three values right there are what we're trying to help with, right? So that's exactly what we're doing to take this way forward. But again, these are not the only options. There are other options. So let's just talk about this idea of civil disobedience. Let's just take one of those things from the last slide and prove that we can actually still use it, right, if we use it right. So there's this prevailing logic that a single protest does nothing. And that's just kind of like what people see, right? You've got all kinds of rallies going around, and if the rallies are of a certain ideology, they're not going to work, right? You could have 12 BLM activists protesting outside of a Capitol building, and they get a law passed within 30 seconds. But you've got tens of thousands of people who want freedom in the streets, and they're not only is a blind eye turned towards them, but they're actively harmed in the process, right? So a single protest does nothing. However, if you combine it with other stuff, if you protest with boycotting, you do some economic warfare, boycotts freaking work. I know it doesn't seem like they do, but they really do, especially if you combine them with changing education systems, right? You don't have to put up with propaganda. You can educate and you can create content and you can push true education instead of indoctrination. Man, that really does help too. Likewise, strikes. Nobody can make you be a good worker, right? Strikes do work. And guess what? Most of the systems and institutions that make this world go round are run by people who are freedom minded, right? I really highly doubt that one of the largest, concrete pouring companies in the United States, which pours the foundations for skyscrapers, I highly doubt that the dudes working on that crew, the hundreds of guys they've got working around, these experts, right, I highly doubt that they are uh, supportive of woke ideology. I really don't think they are. So there you go. I highly doubt that the best paid welders in this country voted for Joe Biden, right? It's pretty clear that the systems and institutions that make our world go around, not the leaders of these companies and things like that, because that's another argument, but the actual dude on the ground, the dude with a stick welder in his hand, the dude with a shovel in his hand, who do they support? Okay, what values do they have? Okay, and more importantly, what power do they have when they don't do their job? Kind of a lot, right? Likewise, if it's not necessarily a manual labor type thing, no one can make you think. No one can make you think up better ways of tyrannizing them. No one can make you innovate on behalf of a company. So if you are working in a company where ideas and thoughts are the main commodity, right, the main way your company is making progress, well, guess what? Who says you have to have a great idea? Maybe you can just have a mediocre idea, an idea that's mediocre enough for you to keep your job, but not enough for them to continue their tyrannical reign. Likewise, we can even engage in social and cultural pressure. We can change the cultural norms. We can make it so that it's not a cool thing to do certain stuff, right? Social and cultural pressure is definitely a huge factor. Maybe not on its own, but when you add all these things up together and you add in an element of timed and coordinated organization for maximum effect, man, you're starting to get into some stuff that's really, really effective. Now, granted, an organized citizenry is lethal to tyrants. Just look at it this way, right? Look at all of the groups out there that have a name associated with their group, and they are conservative groups, okay? Look at how many of the leaders of those groups turned out to actually be either FBI agents or FBI informants, okay? So it's pretty clear that organization is very much a hazard. It is a risk to the regime. So they go through a lot of efforts. The FBI's main goals right now is to prevent citizens from organizing against the government. That's their main goal, and it's been that way for years, but it's really come out lately. However, you can prevent this, or at least make it a little bit less effective. Here's the thing. American citizens are much more hardened normally than the tyrants are. And if you live a hardened lifestyle, if you live a hard lifestyle, you're going to be less affected, right? Nancy Pelosi can't live without her $65 a pint ice cream, right? She just can't, they can't live without going to the beauty salon. They cannot live without going to their clubs or their vacation spots or Martha's Vineyard, okay? But you can live without power and water and sewage and other public utilities, right? If you harden yourself. So the people that are harder physically, mentally, emotionally, those people are the ones who have the advantage, right? Especially in the long run. And if you harden yourself, you're not as vulnerable as they think you are, right? They have the ability to cut your utility off. Okay, they have the ability to cut your power off. They can do like California did, and they directly called the utilities and told the utilities to shut off power and water to individual houses which disobeyed their COVID guidelines. Okay, well, here's the thing. The reverse is not true. You can't call up and say, hey, shut the power off to the governor's mansion because they passed a tyrannical law. Okay, but here's the thing though, if you are prepared to live without water, to live without power, to live without sewage, to live without utilities of any kind, they don't have any power over you. So what can they do? Okay, well, they can take your property from you. They can evict you, right, for not following COVID guidelines. Well, okay, if you're prepared for that, And if you can live in another area, if you can have other property elsewhere, again, they have less power over you. And that's really what this is all about, is just being able to decrease a person's power over you, which in essence increases your own power. We also have to be aware of the idea of time. All of this takes a lot of time, okay? This is not something that is going to happen quickly, okay? Raising a kid it takes a very long time, and it takes a very long time before they are a contributing member to society, or potential contributing member to society. But we also have to remember that time is not an excuse for inaction, right? We have to be aware of those people and groups and organizations that claim that just make the claim of, just wait. The plan is in place. Just wait and see. There's this secret organization out there, and people are going to rise up and take care of it. Just wait, right? One of the most effective ways to prevent a group of people from rising up is to approach them as a friend and convince them that there is some kind of secret society that is working to further their own goals. So just sit back and trust the plan, right? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Again, none of us here have one solid answer to help ease the pain of the world today, nor do we have a solid answer as to how to move forward. We don't know. We're just some people on the internet. At best, we can point out what obviously will not work based on history or our own personal experiences, and we can offer a handful of things that seem like good ideas. And for now, that's a good start, even though it's an unsatisfying one. And perhaps that's a reflection of the times in which we live, unsatisfying. That's really why we have gone through so much effort to lay at least some groundwork for moving forward in our previous content, all of our other stuff. That's really one of our main goals, is to lay the groundwork. Everyone wants the quick and easy answer, especially when they're angry. And people don't like it when ourselves and others point out that it's too late for any simple and easy fix. Our options have been reduced. We've either done this ourselves or let others do it to us, to the point to where the only things that can really get us going in the right direction even are the non-sexy and boring options. The American spirit is ripe with the attitude of revolution and the removal of tyrants. Like, that much is clear. The American spirit is a revolutionary one. But directly, this is not going to work, right? We've proven that this is not going to work. Not only are direct actions not something that's going to work on a strategic level, but even if it succeeds, like, what are you going to do with it? If you win, if you overthrow the government, what are you going to do? You're just going to replace one tyrannical system with another. Right now, our government is a reflection of society, not the other way around. We have a problem with cause and effect in today's world. But if we raise a new generation of children that will grow up to be good human beings and that are educated, moral, and active leaders in their communities, well, that government will reflect that society, because that society will not tolerate anything else, and they will also be equipped, skilled, and knowledgeable enough to make sure that that's the case. But while we're doing that, while we're changing the next generation, we've got to make it. We can't help anybody if we ourselves are either in jail for the rest of our lives or if we're dead. We just can't help anybody if that's the case. And as angry as we are here, I think I speak for all of us here when I say that the actions of the past couple weeks especially, but really the past, I would say, several months, have made us more angry than anyone could possibly imagine. But again, anger doesn't really solve any problems. It's a good motivator to getting to a point to where you can solve problems, but it doesn't solve problems in and of itself. We want to provide options. In a world where the options are reduced and where people want to make you think that certain options don't exist, right? It's either get this experimental medical procedure or you can't work, okay? Get this experimental medical procedure or we're going to take your kids from you, okay? Life in and of itself is never that black and white. There's always another option. There's usually a lot of other options. So we're trying to highlight those and offer more and more options as we move forward, and we encourage others to do the same. providing options, maintaining capabilities when others can't, and being an asset to your local community and to your family and to your team rather than a liability is what's going to help us get out of the situation. That's how we're going to survive the next 10 to 20 years. And regardless of what happens, these things are not a bad thing to do. Sure, other options might open up. We might get a chance at changing our political systems without some kind of, catastrophically bad event, right? We might get a chance at that. And we can take that. We can re-examine that when the time comes. And of course, on local levels, things are different. On state levels, things are different. And even within the federal government, there are little ways that we can get ahead and beat them at their own game and all that kind of stuff. But by and large, what we're going to have to do is start from the ground up. We're going to have to build a society that can then build a government, that can then build a culture, that can then build an economy that's going to work. And to do that, we've got to make it. So let's make it. So let's not sweat the small stuff, but let's also start small. The only way to change the world is to start one step at a time. And if that one step at a time involves changing one mind at a time, that's perfectly fine. Because every mind that we can change now, every person that we can encourage to be a good human being right now will help us in the future. So let's keep moving forward and let's continue to do good things in the best way that we know how. Even if that means that, at least for right now, we might have to fight in the shade.